You know what I think is funny is listening back to the episodes. I feel like you start about 85% of them by saying, wow.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
You're surprised a lot.
I am. It's just nice too.
Yeah.
You know, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, you too.
No.
I also like the painting. It's classic.
Too bad they'll never see it. Although, you know, every once in a while I do wonder, like, maybe I should try to do video. Like, you know.
Yeah.
It's just a whole thing.
If somebody would be able to make cartoons of us, that would be good.
It would be awesome, yeah. Or if we got like an AI generator to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we're not quite there yet, but we'll probably be there kind of soon.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think our numbers are moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, so we should plug our show first off.
Oh, yeah. Right. Okay, so we have a show.
That's right.
That's coming up on Friday, January 12th. Yes.
Yep. That sounds right. Yep.
Yeah. In Dripping Springs, Texas, at a place called Dog and Bone Pub.
Yeah.
Show starts at 7:30. It's free. They got beer, they got wine. Come on out. It's pretty fun. Yeehaw.
It's gonna be fun on the bun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What do you have planned for the show? Any special surprises? New music?
I mean, it'll be new for probably most of the people there. I actually am. I just submitted a song to CD Baby, set to release on the 26th.
Ooh.
But you know that won't be out by then. But I will be playing it.
Excellent.
So how about that? It's sort of like the release show.
Oh yeah, that's fun.
Yeah,
at Dog and Bone Pub in Dripping Springs.
That's right. Dog and Bone Pub. Dog and Bone Pub. Dog and Bone Pub. Friday.
Yeah. Have you looked them up at all?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it should be good.
Cool.
And yeah, it's gonna be fun to drive out there too.
Yeah, it'll be sweet.
Dushka.
That's true.
And
yeah.
Anyway,
it's gonna be fun. All right. We'll do it. We'll do a show. And then anybody, I assume most of our listeners are in Texas.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, so we're talking about consciousness today.
Yeah.
And yeah. I think
what was funny is it was a shorter reading than we've ever had, and it took me just as long.
Really? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. It took, anyway. Yeah. So it's,
well, you've read it before.
Right. So I was sort of glossing through it. But yeah, so we are trying something a little bit different today. This is a much more science jargon heavy piece that we're doing. And yeah, no, I mean, I don't blame you for having problems. Also, he wasn't the best writer, to be perfectly honest. And,
okay.
And yeah, so, I mean, there's also that. But yeah, so the article was published in 2010 in the Theoretical Biology and Medical Modeling journal. And it's called A Thalamic Reticular Networking Model of Consciousness by Byoung-Kyong Min. So I think this guy is actually, he was at Harvard at the time that he wrote it, but I think he's back in South Korea.
Okay.
And so essentially, just to summarize it really quickly, I think I essentially did this before in the last episode, but it's this idea, this person is trying to posit using neuroanatomical reasoning, essentially, that this specific part of the thalamus, the thalamic reticular nucleus, is the central hub that controls our conscious awareness. And he does this by, showing all sorts of examples of why this is. Like, you have a lot of basically almost all the sensory and motor information goes through the thalamus, and specifically it also has to transit through the thalamic reticular nucleus at some point. And the thalamic reticular nucleus has pacemaker activity, meaning it has sort of firing in a very like a pacemaker, like a clock. And it also has an ability to affect and synchronize a lot of the brain waves in the brain. And you'll probably notice that a big thing that this paper was harping on is consciousness, right? Is thought of as a uniform. The definition of consciousness is awareness of oneself and one's surrounding. That's sort of just a blanket definition. But from I guess you could say an electrophysiological standpoint, it's kind of thought to be synchronization of brain waves is how people think about consciousness a lot. And so that's one of the reasonings that he uses, is that this is a big hub that seems to be able to synchronize a lot of the brain waves.
Right.
And then it also has recurrent connections, and it's mostly inhibitory. And so this is another thing that he focuses on, that it's a lot of what it's doing is actually dampening and selecting for certain stimuli that's going to make it ultimately to the cortex or back out into the motor part. And so it has like big connections coming from this part in the brain called the globus pallidus externus, which is a component of the brain that is very important for willful motor movement. And it's part of the basal ganglia, which is important for volition, motor movement. And so yeah, so that's sort of a quick summary. Right. We're done now.
Kind of.
Yeah. So what do you think?
I mean, I don't know. So actually, one of my main questions is I was going through and I wasn't able to find what you called consciousness makes sense to me. I wasn't able to find it that clearly in there.
Oh, no, that was the definition as awareness of oneself and one's surroundings. Yeah, no, he doesn't define it as clearly. That's that's from my own work.
Yeah, because he has a definition that says a mental state embodied through TRN modulated synchronization of the thalamocortical networks.
Right. And so
that feels kind of circular.
Yeah, no,
it seems like that's what he's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this is where, like some of his sub headings were like weirdly written. And I wonder if this is because potentially, and I'm nothing against the guy, but it seems like, especially if he's living in South Korea now, it's English probably isn't his first language. And that's, again, that's something that you see a lot, but it's nothing against the person. He's obviously very smart.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just wonder sometimes if, especially in how some of the stuff is phrased, I wonder about that. But yeah, it's circular because he's obviously trying to build a definition of consciousness with his model. But you're right. There's one good example and feedback of like what is consciousness without involving the TRN, i.e. the thalamic reticular nucleus. And that's why I was trying to explain the synchronization part, because he has it built in. It's this idea that consciousness is a synchronization of a bunch of different brain states together. And so you have something that's doing that to lead to the unitary moment.
Presumably it's a specific type of synchronization, because he also talks about unconscious perception or something like that, which is presumably another type of synchronization.
Right.
That's either specifically not putting certain information into the conscious area or missing it entirely or something like that, or some combination.
Right. And so that was another important point that he made, is that the TRN neurons actually have two firing states. They have a burst and a tonic firing state, and the tonic is thought to be sort of more associated with background and maybe the unconscious state. Whereas the burst firing is maybe the conscious. And so this is just, tonic is going to be, you have a long sort of activation of neurons, whereas burst is going to be, you have a big burst of activation and then you have a quiescent period. So yeah. So he does some credence to other theories. Like he tries to work his theory into basically a bunch of other theories of consciousness.
Right.
And like one of which is most people, when they think of consciousness, if you take a psychology class, a lot of them are going to sort of talk about it with reference to the prefrontal cortex. It's basically the frontal lobe, which is the front part of your brain.
Right.
And this is colloquially understood as the executive function. This is where a lot of your sort of reasoning and everything comes into bounds. But his point in sort of how this is, first off, it receives connections from the prefrontal cortex. So there's one way that the thalamic reticular nucleus comes into actually potentially controlling this. And then, as I already said, it receives a lot of efference from the globus pallidus externus, which itself receives a bunch of connections from the prefrontal cortex. So a lot of stuff is having to go through this specific part of the thalamus. And so I should say the thalamus also is just, anatomically speaking, is very it's like centrally located in your brain. So it's I mean, it's known as the global regulator of so many things: your sleep, your body temperature and stuff, along with the hypothalamus, I should say. The hypothalamus is just right in front of the thalamus. And then basically almost all of your sensory information has to go, and motor information has to go through it to get in and out of the brain. And so also the thalamic reticular nucleus has connections to something called what was it? It was the the tegmentum, essentially, which is which is a part in the brainstem, which is known for arousal and stuff like that. And not actual arousal, but like staying awake and stuff like that.
Actual arousal?
Well, not like this, sexual arousal.
Oh yeah. Careful.
Yeah, that's more of this. I think the septum is part of that. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
The septum, like in your nose?
It's a. So, I mean,
this is the.
No, it's in the brain.
It'd be funny. Yeah, most people don't know that middle part of your nose.
Yeah. Well, Well. Yeah. But
I mean, his trying to piece together the theories. Actually, I wrote down a question because he puts that right at the beginning. He lays out a couple or a few different theories about sort of the location of consciousness, and then he says, therefore, we need a unified theory to integrate these previous theories and provide us with a clearer understanding of all the phenomena of consciousness. And my question is, why do we need a unified theory? What if they're all wrong? Why? Okay, so it's more of a sort of a theory of research, but why would you need to unify previous theories?
Well, it's the idea that all of these theories are sort of talking about a component of consciousness, but then it's I think that's more of the question. And they whereas this is sort of trying to take a lot of those components and loop them into one thing. Like again, how can the prefrontal cortex be doing have a role in reasoning, and then also how does as he said, the limbic system has a big role in memory and emotional memory and everything like that. And how does this also play a role in consciousness? So anyway, it's just trying to tease together all of these things. And some of the theories I wasn't even, I can't remember them offhand, but it's like the global processing theory or whatever, and stuff like that. And yeah, he talks about how these fit in. And I do agree, though, it's not a complete, like some of the reasonings, kind of like when we were reading Socrates, he would be like, and this fits in with this because of this. And then I was like, well, this doesn't really feel that concrete, though. Right. But again, it's kind of just it's not an experimental article. It's just essentially it's not a review either, but it's kind of a review in that he's trying to just he's aggregating a bunch of information.
Right. Yeah, he doesn't have an experiment that he's laid out specifically or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I'm reading it correctly, his basic premise is that the thalamus is sort of the location of consciousness, and it's distributed to other important areas of the brain with the TRN system.
Yeah. And I mean, the thalamus is distributed to other parts of the brain just generally, and the TRN seems to be having an inhibitory effect on these connections elsewhere.
So can you explain a little bit more specifically about TRN? Because I don't really get it. So thalamic, I was looking up the words.
Sure.
And thalamus, like the etymology of it is like inner chamber or sleeping room, like a bedroom.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I mean, reticular is a net, like a network, but then network is the next thing.
Right.
So the network of networks of your bedroom. Or something.
Yeah. No, I mean, so what you can think of it as, so the thalamic reticular network is basically this location around, I think the front part mostly of the thalamus. So it's this little sliver of cells. And that last word is the thalamic reticular nucleus. Anytime you see nucleus when you're...
nucleus, yes.
Yeah, and so he's talking about a network theory, but actual I know it's a little confusing. The actual anatomic location he's talking about are the thalamic reticular nucleus cells. And so nucleus, whenever you talk about this, is just a clump of cell bodies, essentially.
Okay.
So we can get into a whole thing, but a neuron very simply can be thought of as you have an input, information's coming into a neuron, and it's coming into a neuron via these things called dendrites. And then the information travels via electrical, basically depolarization through the cell body, and then it goes out on a thing called an axon. And then that axon will go connect to another neuron's dendrite, and the process sort of repeats itself. So nuclei are generally where you have the cell bodies of neurons, and often you'll also have their dendrites will be there, and neurons from a variety of places. But in this case, like I said, you have axons from the globus pallidus externus, which is, in the higher region of the brain, basal ganglia. And you also have other neurons sending afferents, like I already said, the tegmentum and the tectum, the superior colliculus, and other areas. You have cortical areas are all sending axons, their output, to either the thalamus or directly to the thalamic reticular nucleus. Now, if it's to the thalamus itself, other basically nuclei within the thalamus, some of these then have their extensions that will go and connect to the thalamic reticular nucleus. However, some of the brain regions will connect directly to the thalamic reticular nucleus. So the thalamic reticular nucleus can be thought of as a bunch of basically centroids of cell bodies that surround the thalamus. I mean, they're part of the thalamus, but they're on the outer reaches. So if you just Google, if anybody's listening, just Google thalamic reticular nucleus, and you'll see the nucleus, the thalamus rather, and it has, a bunch of sort of central locations, and then this sliver on the outside, and that's the thalamic reticular nucleus. And I think reticular, when I think of reticular, like you said, it's sort of web-like and stuff like that. I think that's partly because, again, it's a bunch of different nuclei. So they're all going to be sort of compartmentalized. And so this is another reason that he's sort of saying this could be something that is important for consciousness, because even though you have all these separate, like, you could think of parallel processing centers for information, there's actually some overlap between them. And so they could thus take in a bunch of information, and then because they're also connected with each other, they can kind of unify that information and decide how the pulse, the excitation should go back into the brain, essentially.
Nice. And
did that make any sense?
I think it makes some sense, and I don't know the names of all these things you're talking about, but the process makes sense to me.
Yeah. Okay.
So as an outsider to this field, is this a contentious point of view? Is it like he says the thalamus is super important, and this TRN system is pivotal in its sort of inhibitory system for what information gets to and from the thalamus? Is this the kind of thing that he proposes and people in the neuroscience field are like, you're crazy? That's absurd.
Potentially. I actually don't know. Like, this doesn't seem to be that like well. I haven't heard of it in my studies. Like, nobody's taught this to me.
So how did you come across it?
I was just randomly, because I'm always interested about what do people think the central locus of consciousness is. So I came across it through that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I came across it on my own, just like Googling, essentially. And, but, here, I can look real quick. One way to decide how well a paper is received is to look at the number of citations. So this was 13 years ago, 14 years ago now. It's only got 133 citations. So that's actually...
So what should it have?
If it was like a really well-accepted paper, it would have thousands,
Because if I wrote a paper about like some music thing and it had a few hundred citations, I feel like that would be... I could pat myself on the back.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I agree. But like, to give you an idea, like my boss published a paper in 2007 and it's got, I think, like 3,000 citations.
Oof,
and so
nice.
But that's not even like that's still kind of nothing cool compared to the big ones. Yeah. Well, but like, here, let's look at, I was actually thinking if we wanted to keep on this, we could do Maslow's hierarchy of needs paper. And like those sorts of things.
Everybody in the world talks about that.
Well, exactly. And that's the point, though. That's a well-accepted thing. So that's going to have tens of thousands of citations.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so I read this and I don't know neuroscience at all, but it doesn't sound crazy to me. It sounds reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think the big, like, again, you could see him giving homage to, I would say, the more popular theories of where consciousness resides, like in the prefrontal cortex and whatnot, through his trying to make that fit with this model. The reason I like it, but again, I'm not completely convinced either, is that it does seem to me that you do need just like, you want to, when you're thinking about consciousness, you do want to look at whatever region of the brain is most highly interconnected. What region of the brain has the most connections? And that's probably going to be the region of the brain that's important for consciousness. So another region is a part called the claustrum, which is basically connects. It's right between the cerebral cortex and subcortical regions of the brain. Like the amygdala, hippocampus, and and thalamus, hypothalamus, basal ganglia, which has a bunch of regions. But as I was saying, the reason that that's thought to be another sort of part where you could have consciousness is because it's highly connected. So that's maybe what I find most compelling about this theory. Although you could potentially say that the thalamus as a whole, not just this one part of the thalamus, could be this thought of as a central hub. Because again, it's like all your information, motor and sensory, has to go through the thalamus in some way.
Right.
So it's just and it's centrally located. It's just right in the center of your head, essentially.
Right.
And it's the major gateway keeper, gate. But yeah, anyway, I'm talking too much.
Well, so what do you think if you had to propose your thought on the location of consciousness?
I don't know, because I tend to sort of think that it is potentially distributed.
That's actually what I was about to. I was gonna go there next, so that's cool.
Yeah, because where all of these parts are important, but it's like, and again, he was already kind of doing this, where he was saying, yeah, so the prefrontal cortex is important for reasoning, and you sort of decide you want to do something, and then it's got to go through the thalamus, but the thalamus is going to be important for doing a check. But it's like it takes all of these regions as a whole to then synchronize, and potentially when you look at consciousness, or the brain rather, electrophysiologically with like EEG, you're going to you see these sort of you see a lot of different waves, but you see some slow theta waves too. And it seems like those slow pulses are potentially the regions of where conscious sort of thought is occurring, because these are these waves that are going to then go through the brain and synchronize a bunch of neurons together. But it's not to say that the gamma waves, which are higher frequency, as he talks about, these are greater than 30 hertz, are also going to be important. And the gamma frequency waves almost seem like they're important for kind of like blanking the system, so that then you can go in with a slower wave and synchronize it with something. But yeah, this is actually one of the sort of areas that I'm hoping to go into, because I just think it is so fascinating just thinking about just the waves of the brain. I mean, a lot has been done. It's not like EEG is a new technology, but I was actually, one downside to his paper is I thought he could have gone further into the synchronization stuff. I think that's really the key to figuring out consciousness in the brain. But yeah, anyway, so what do you think? You were saying you were thinking it might be distributed.
Well, the distributed idea, I mean, I don't know, because I read through this and I don't feel like I have a good grasp. I'll put it a different way. It feels to me like the word consciousness keeps changing its meaning. It feels like an ill-defined idea, and then we're looking at data points and processes to try and find the location of something. It feels to me similar to saying, what is the central location of life in your body? Which, if anything, the answer is it's probably kind of distributed. Like, it's not just your heart. It's your heart and your lungs and your brain and the circulation of blood. It's a whole bunch of stuff. There isn't one life point in your body.
Yeah, but this is why consciousness is so interesting. And again, he gives credence to like the prefrontal cortex and even the hypothalamus or the hippocampus as being important for this as well. But there's some unitary thing that does form out of all of these different systems. So when we say it's this moment right now, it's your perception.
I guess, to me, maybe I'm wrong. To me, that doesn't feel like that's been demonstrated. That this moment is definitely coming out of those processes. I can see. It doesn't seem wild to me. It doesn't seem irrational, but it doesn't seem like proven beyond all doubt
that these processes lead to. Well, yeah, because what you take the, I guess you have, I feel like you have a little bit of a spiritual thought with consciousness too, right?
I don't know. To me, that's also not proven. Like I have the same questions for that. It doesn't.
Oh, I said your name. I gotta bleep it.
Yeah, I don't listen to the spiritual side and go, yeah, they've got it. They're onto it either.
Well, it's an interesting idea of like the antenna hypothesis, that it's like we're just we have basically, we're a biological antenna for stuff, for like some
maybe.
kind of like Wi-Fi, consciousness Wi-Fi.
It feels to me like they're both essentially metaphors.
Well, of course, because I think that's how you could say everything's a metaphor, man.
Right, but trying to scientifically prove a metaphor is a kind of a weird task, I think.
It's tough. But it's like, again, I think evidence to suggest that the moment does exist, first off, and that it's grounded physiologically, is shown in examples that he said, like where you ablate. And this was, I think, maybe the strongest reason for his theory, is that like you ablate the thalamic reticular nucleus, you get a coma-like state.
With the rats, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, I think even just in people who have had lesions there, it puts them into, like you have a stroke or something.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this show.
I buy that the thalamus is important, and like if it's injured or if things interrupt its processes, you will perceive less. And this is what I'm saying. I buy to a certain degree that our perception of existence is related to processes in our brain, and maybe more than related, maybe run by. But at the very least, it seems somewhat distributed.
Yes. Well, and I was going to say, potentially the best example for this, as I've already said, memory is extremely important for consciousness, in my opinion. I think it's a prerequisite for consciousness. And memory has been found to be distributed. It's like there was a bunch of studies, famous studies done in like the 50s and just mid 20th century, where this guy, I was trying to find his name, I can't remember his name, it starts with a C. And he just did all of these studies where he was ablating different parts of the rat's brain, trying to find, like, is there a central locus for memory? And granted, of course, there are central locuses for where memory is consolidated, like the hypothalamus. I keep saying hypothalamus, hippocampus. So we know that's important for memory consolidation and like the mammillary bodies. But in terms of like, your memory of when you were like a kid and you went to school or whatever on a specific day, that is distributed throughout the brain. It's not in just one part. It's, potentially there's a central neuron that is sort of like controlling most of the connections, but that's even just so hard to tease out of the billions of neurons that we have. So, and that kind of makes sense to me when you also think about how the brain functions as these, just a bunch of different nodes that are important for different things. Like the occipital lobe has the visual cortex, the temporal lobe is going to have the auditory cortex. The parietal lobe has the somatosensory cortex, and the frontal lobe has the motor cortex. So all of these are just different hubs where information is going to be processed, and then also, of course, with the motor cortex is going to be consolidated and sent out to do things. Right. And so you have to think, like, if you're trying to remember something, you're going to have a visual cue of that. You might have a sound cue. You might even like remember like feelings, like tactile things that day, or like hot and stuff. So you're going to have a neuron that's going to be connected in some way to all of these locations, is how I think about it.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree. I think we're in agreement. It's probably most likely distributed, but it does beg this question of whether there is a central hub that controls the consolidation of all of this information into the singularity that is the moment, I guess.
Right.
Because that's the thing. I mean, I don't know how you're perceiving the world, but I assume you're perceiving it literally like me, right? Right? I mean, Antushka, is that true?
I'm just like all over
I don't know, man. Yeah, you're like Slaughterhouse 5 guy.
I'm unstuck in time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be a cool book to read.
Yeah, we can read that.
Because it's not very long either. But yeah.
No, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
I actually
good old high school reading.
Yeah. I was gonna say I did kind of recently read it though.
Okay.
I'd never read it actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so I'm just asking because you're saying it's not really proven to you, but I assume it's proven as much as it can be to your own experience that you're perceiving something that's called the moment, right?
I don't know.
God, you slippery fish.
No, I think so. I think so. As soon as I start thinking about the moment, though, I start thinking about how I'm kind of, always thinking backwards and forwards, and the moment itself is sort of, it's that ephemeral thing. It's gone as soon as it's happened. But so I don't know what the moment is.
But you're processing something, whether it's the past or the present or the future.
Well, yes, this is where I connect with your idea about memory being intrinsic to consciousness, because if I'm sort of, some of my favorite activities are activities where I am not engaging directly with memory or projection. Like if I'm playing music and I'm improvising in sort of, flow state or whatever.
Yep.
Then I of course am engaging with memory and all those things. But as little as possible is the most fun to me. My preference is as close to a rock as I can be.
Yes. No, and because it makes sense because you're gonna get in your own way the more you think about it.
Right. But I would say that most of the time I'm engaging with the past and the future a lot.
Yes. But I guess my point, and that's a good point, my point more refined would be you're doing whatever it is when there's consciousness. It's a one moment at a time thing. Whether that moment is you projecting in the past, there is a singular, like linear progression of something one after the other. And that's kind of the point. Is that?
And would you say, okay, so this is it's a little bit off the article, but if you say one moment after together, there's like a frames per second kind of a thing, or is it actually continuous?
Well, so this is a very interesting idea that I was thinking about. I was actually talking to ChatGPT about it.
Nice.
It seems like it's continuous because time appears to be continuous, and I was actually thinking time and distance appear to be the only two things that are actually continuous. There's everything else that we think about
is granular,
or we make it granular. And even furthermore, it seems like all physical relations all can be broken back to time and space. Like, all measurements of any time are just like different sort of amalgamations of time and space. Like velocity, obviously, is just time and space. Just,
But velocity is probably not actually granular. That's just how we measure it.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's continuous. But, like temperature, which it is really just vibration of molecules. And again, what's vibration is a rate and a distance of things. So yeah, everything is continuous is the point. So to your point, it does appear that the frames per second is a continuous thing, or it's so fast that we perceive it to be continuous because the rate is too quick.
I mean, what I would bet is more likely our perception has some kind of frames per second limit, but time itself is continuous.
Well, but I've said previously that I think time comes out of consciousness.
Maybe. Yeah.
It's like time is the way that we can construct our conscious perception of the world. And again, that's why I find these waves of the brain so interesting. And potentially, I want to read something more in depth about that. So just get ready for that, Antushka.
Oh yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, because if you want to look for a frame rate, that could be it. It's like that's why I find the pacemaker cells of the brain and just the body so interesting, because are these the things that are determining the frame rate of consciousness? And again, what's determining the pace of these cells is calcium.
Right.
It all comes back to calcium, Antushka. Yeah. And calcium is, in some ways, it is the way that we, again, it's the way that we preserve and build memory. It's just very interesting, because it's like, what are your bones made out of? It's calcium phosphate. And what are the things, like the longest lasting things of us are our bones.
Right. And what about when you feel it in your bones?
Yeah. I was on a roll there, Antushka.
Calcium.
Calcium, man.
Yeah, he said something about calcium in this too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because when he was talking about the firing, right? Mm-hmm. But all neuron firing the memory component is mostly controlled by calcium.
Right.
Think of it as, it's called long-term potentiation or depression. Mm-hmm. And we could go into a whole thing about that. That's actually really the stuff I know the most about.
Okay.
That's the stuff we should actually be talking about, but it gets a little bit too in the weeds. But yeah, anyway, maybe someday.
Yeah. So it strikes me as if I think about something like a computer, there's a CPU, which is actually not in charge of memory.
Mm-hmm.
But that's controlling sort of the frame rate, the maximum number of things that can be done and or perceived at once.
Right. There's a clock.
Right. Exactly. And so it wouldn't surprise me if there were different parts of our brain that were in charge of different aspects of that. And so without memory, even if you have a really fast brain, it's not going to seem like anything, or it will, but that seeming will disappear as soon as it happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's exactly it. And that's why I find that the Lost Mariner chapter from Oliver Sacks's Man Who Took His Wife for a Hat so intriguing, because it's exactly that. And again, this is a person who drank so much alcohol that he eroded his mammillary bodies in his brain, which are part of the limbic system and are important for memory consolidation. And so he basically was only working within a 5-minute buffer, and he would forget everything. Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a joke.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like the setup to a joke. There was a guy who could only remember things for 5 minutes.
Right. Well, it's like, and this is the thing, is like he could play checkers, but he couldn't play chess.
Yeah.
You know? And he thought he was 19, so that's the other intriguing part, is like some of his long-term...
Did he always think he was 19? So yeah, there was something long, yeah.
He was stuck in, like, it was like whatever, I think it was in the 60s or maybe 70s when Oliver Sacks met him. Yeah. And he thought that it was just after World War II. He was like 19.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It's also crazy to me, the variations in people. Like, some people can drink their whole life to excess, and it does like minimal damage compared to other people. Right. And some people can like really mess them up. Right.
Yeah. And that's probably just goes to our ability to, like, we have just different enzymes in our liver, like different, I should say different variants of enzymes in our liver that are more capable of processing alcohol.
Yep.
And basically neutralizing it. But yeah, no, I mean, one of the really intriguing things about that chapter, and maybe honestly we should just read that chapter for next time. I was thinking of doing Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I mean, this might be kind of interesting too. What would you rather do? So the Maslow is also kind of short. It's, I mean, relatively short. It's also a much easier read. And it's essentially the paper, it was published in like 1943, put forth the hierarchy of needs stuff. It's like 20.
Yeah, let's do that.
Or we could do this chapter on the law.
Both. There are 2 weeks coming up.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's more than that, actually.
Well, I was going to say, I was only thinking of one just because then I was going to hand it off to you to decide.
No, it's fine. Let's do them both. Actually, something that could be, I don't know if it's any good. it's sort of a sidetrack. Did you ever read what's the other Oliver Sacks, Musicophilia?
I never did read it, but
I mean, it's just like really weird sort of music-based disorders.
Yeah.
Like
that'd be cool.
There was one that always drives me wild of somebody who can't hear music.
Mm-hmm.
So their brain doesn't do the interpretive step. You know, like if you were to look at a painting of an apple, you just see paint on a page. You don't see it as an apple. The same thing. They don't hear it as music. They just hear noises.
Right.
And so music is really irritating to them.
Yes, that's very interesting. And I would want to know if that person has other sort of anomalies of consciousness. Because again, it seems like it's a, there's something to stringing together a melody, for instance.
Right. Somebody else in that book, it was really weird. They got struck by lightning and then they became obsessed with Chopin. And all of a sudden, like, I didn't really understand this. I think they didn't really play piano and all of a sudden they could play Chopin pieces.
That's bizarre.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense, yeah. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, no, that would definitely be interesting to read. So maybe we do Maslow's next week, and then we transition into Oliver Sacks for a few weeks.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and at some point, I want to read. So another thing that he talks about in here is the Hebbian learning model.
Yep.
That he's trying to sort of correspond his theory with, and the Hebbian model it's a very important theory. And it's basically to be thought of simply as neurons that wire together, fire together. And so he was trying to work it into his theory through synchronization, because it's the idea that if you are synchronizing neurons, that's essentially the wiring them together so that when they get stimulated again, one of them gets stimulated again, that ensemble of neurons is going to be likely to fire all at once. And so this is, I would say, the bedrock of how I think about the brain and the mind as associative, because again, it's like you can think of it just from if you are like listening to a piece of music, that's, I think, how memory can be embedded in music, because it's like if you're doing something, like you're studying something and you're listening to a piece of music, when you go back and listen to that piece of music, you'll be more likely to remember the thing that you were studying then, because you've kind of connected the neurons that were processing the music at that time with the neurons that were processing whatever information you were taking in at that time.
Right.
That's all based off of Donald Hebb's theory, which again, you could say was even basing it off of associationism, which goes back to Aristotle, but he just gave it a nice coherent system,
right?
That jived with the modern, at the time in the 40s, the modern understanding of neuroscience, and has since been corroborated with, as I've already said, things like long-term potentiation and depression, which is the idea that if you continuously sort of stimulate a neuron, it will be more likely, it'll take less of a stimulus the next time you hit it. It'll be more likely to fire from that specific neuron.
It's like an entropy idea.
In what way?
Sort of it's already at least somewhat in motion. It's already energized. And so getting it from 0 to 10 is harder than getting it from 4 to 10.
Yeah, or potential energy, I guess.
Right.
But yeah. Exactly, though. It's more easily, that's exactly it, though. It's more easily energized the next time. And not even just, it's got to be from that specific, at that specific point, though. Like there'll be maybe another part of that neuron that won't be as easily stimulated.
Right.
And where we could get into the dendritic spines, which we don't have to, but every neuron is connected to a bunch of other neurons.
Nice.
So it's very complicated, which is why consciousness is complicated. But anyway, that I was thinking we could read Donald Hebb's stuff, because he just is talking a lot about perception. And again, he's doing it in a less jargon way. It's a book. Yeah, but I think Oliver Sacks would be a good thing to transition to. So
Sure.
So we'll do Maslow next week, and then maybe we'll do The Lost Mariner the following week, and then we'll go to musicophilia stuff after that. If you want to think of some interesting.
Yeah, I got to think of the fun ones. It's I thought it was a little bit of a silly book, but
well, I mean that's
the not hearing music thing is wild. I think about that all the time. Like that's a crazy idea to me.
Yeah, I would.
And then I think like, is that what dogs hear and stuff? If we're playing music, they just hear us making weird noises.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But then there's like all these like videos of elephants, people playing music for elephants. They seem to have some kind of ability to react to music.
Or cows.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, like even dogs to some degree, like my sister's dog, whenever she sings.
Oh, yeah. I've seen those videos. They're pretty cute.
Exactly. Yeah. And now, granted, it doesn't mean that it's actually, like it actually has to be her voice. So it's not clear that they're just responding to any melody, you know, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So then maybe I've asked this to you on the podcast before, but what to you is the benefit to finding the location of consciousness?
Yeah. It's a good question. I would say maybe just shortly, it's one step towards trying to understand how to quantify it. And quantifying it would be important, but I've also already said it's a little bit of a scary concept. To be able to measure different people's levels of consciousness as a means of trying to increase it in some people that it needs to be increased in. Because again, I would say consciousness is in our society, and we can argue whether this should be the case, but I think civilization essentially is conscious individuals trying to work together. And it's almost, if you're not conscious, these are the people that are really going to get trampled and left in the dust in society. And consciousness is built into our legal system in every way. It's like manslaughter versus just, what is it?
Murder?
First degree murder or second degree.
I always think of that as a version of thought crime.
Well, but
that to say, like, what were you thinking while you were doing it?
Well, and again,
what were you believing?
Yeah. Right. But manslaughter is like you didn't intend
you didn't mean to.
Right. Which is against, it could be thought of as unconscious or an accident, obviously. But in some cases, it's like unconscious. You didn't mean to do it. Whereas it's like the closer you get to consciousness, the more premeditative.
Right. It's this whole, it's old George Carlin bit. You gotta wanna.
Right.
You gotta wanna.
Right. So the reasons for understanding it, again, neurophysiologically, would be to try to get at this idea that it does seem clear that different people reside at different levels of consciousness.
Right.
And I'm not actually convinced that you can't actually increase people's levels of awareness. And if you have a way to monitor that, you can do it in a more quantitative way. And then this would it would open up all sorts of treatment modalities, because right now, as we've already also talked about, a lot of the sort of drugs that we use essentially to treat conscious disorders, whether it's depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, these are all disorders of consciousness when you think about it in perception. If you have a quantitative way of understanding somebody's level of consciousness, you have a better way of actually monitoring if you give these people a drug. Is it actually doing something, or are you just messing them up further? Right. We have no, other than just, measuring their behavior, we don't really have a good way of doing that right now.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of...
The last thing would be then, would be the age-old question of whether you can somehow capture consciousness and transfer it.
Yeah. I don't know if I should ask the questions, I'm thinking.
Why?
I don't know. It just feels like it's nice. You have a nice idealistic idea. I don't want to be an asshole.
No, but I mean, there are definitely downsides to all this. And
I mean, I feel like there's immediate risks because you could find some things that would lead you down roads that you might not want to go down. You could find, whole groups of people having more or less consciousness than others. And if your project is to try and even out the consciousness field, then we're in sort of classic, almost eugenics territory.
Yep.
I think the other thing is you're sort of going into the project pathologizing lower levels of consciousness or something like that. So there's the prioritizing of the higher levels of consciousness from the get-go. Which then, if I'm spending my life trying to eliminate consciousness and live in the moment, am I a crazy person according to this project?
No. And it's a good point because, and this is something that I've written about, is I actually think that leaning too much into consciousness.
Right. I see. So there's a happy medium. You don't want to be too conscious either. Oh
no, because that's what
right
breeds anxious, insomniac fiends.
Right.
Yeah. So but again, it would be about because like I like I've said is like going too far into it is anxiety. Leaning too far away from it, you have the risk of basically barbarism.
Right.
Just animalistic behavior. And you're right. The way that I was describing it is sort of pathologizing lower levels of consciousness. Mm-hmm. But as we've already seen, there are pathological higher levels of consciousness, as maybe some serial killers embody.
Right.
It
also strikes me that there's probably variation of your level of consciousness sort of throughout the day and throughout different periods of your life.
Oh, yeah. Like when you go to sleep.
Right. Yeah, of course. I wasn't even counting that, but yes, of course.
Yeah.
You're like, this person has super low consciousness. What's going on? We need to give them medicine. Like, he's just asleep. Like, what's going on?
Right. Well, and again, we are already doing this, and that's my point, but we're doing it in a very blunt fashion.
Right. I'm not sure that I believe sometimes. I don't know that all types of depression and anxiety situations are due to sort of a misalignment of consciousness or something like that. Like depression as an idea in many cases makes perfect sense to me. And I know that there's a move and it is sort of pathologized a lot. I tend to view depression as, and people get really mad at me about this, so it's okay if people are mad at me about it, but as pretty adaptive in most situations. Like most depression that I've encountered with other people makes a lot of sense given their situation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but
like
it's
the whole chemical imbalance thing. I'm not saying it never happens, but I would say that the vast majority of depression that I've encountered seems situational to me.
Right.
As a non-psychologist, I don't know what I'm talking about.
It's a situation of reflection, and again, I find it as it's a disease of hyper awareness in some, and which is again consciousness. It's like, you're right. You could be depressed because of your circumstances because you're reflecting on your circumstances so much to a pathological degree. Yes, and when you look at the treatments people use, a lot of them are sort of slowing down those thought processes of not getting caught in those feedback loops.
Right.
A lot of people will self medicate with alcohol, which of course,
that's not super helpful.
Well, but it's also like when I think of the number one drug that shuts off consciousness, it's alcohol, which is evidenced by the fact that if you drink too much, you black out. And if you drink too much for an extended period of time, as we've already talked about, you get Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome and you can't remember, you can't make new memories.
Right. Are there people who can't black out? Or like, I don't know. I've never blacked out. I've drunk. I've gone through. I've had nights where I drink a lot, but like I know people who tend to black out.
Yes. Yeah.
With less drinking than I've done.
We lived with somebody.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. Is like I could be drinking the same amount as them and be, at least from my perspective, as like very drunk. But I've never blacked out.
No, I'm with you. I don't think I've ever blacked out. So I think that if we drank enough, we probably all would. Die. You know?
I just feel like I would have to die before I'd black out. I wouldn't black out. I would just.
And what is that? That's the ultimate blackout.
Yeah, sure. We die is the ultimate blackout. It makes it sound fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's more of a, and it's more of honestly just trying it. The reason for finding the location of consciousness is again to find a way to measure it. So you can't measure it if you don't even know where it is.
Right.
And the reason to measure it is to be less qualitative about all of the treatments that we're currently doing on people that I think we're doing essentially blinded.
Right.
And which are causing all sorts of issues.
Right.
So, but I completely agree. And again, I think we've talked about this previously where I myself have a lot of reservations about this because you're right. It does, like in the wrong hands, this sort of information can be used for bad things of like, these individuals are less conscious.
Yeah.
Or these individuals are more conscious and we need to get rid of them.
Right.
And yeah, that's obviously not something I'm trying to do.
Right, of course. Yeah.
It's all for treatment modalities. And then, but you're right. You can have the question of whether you should even be treating any of this. And that's a perfectly valid question. But you started by saying pathologizing, and it's like, in some cases, when you're talking about pathologies of the mind, they're almost intrinsically tied to your ability to function in society. That's like the main criteria that psychologists and psychiatrists are using to decide whether something is pathological, is whether it's affecting your ability to do things on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And then would that be from... Because I feel like with psychology, there's an interesting line, because I feel like for a lot of things, it comes down to, does it cause a problem for you? Like it can reach a threshold where they're worried about whether or not it's causing a problem for other people. But I think that, if you're sad, but it's not causing you massive amounts of distress or keeping you from doing the things you want to do, they're probably not going to diagnose you clinically with depression. And so I would say that most disorders, from what I understand within the DSM, first and foremost are they causing problems to you in the way that you want to live your life? And so it's interesting to set it on the society side of, is it inhibiting your ability to function in society? Because that's sort of a give and take with you and other people.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. A lot of it, of course, is going to be a question of like, how do you feel?
Right.
But I mean, almost on all of these, and you could include sleep in this.
Right.
It's like your ability to function on an everyday basis to get whatever you're supposed to be getting done.
Right.
Because if you're not sleeping, of course, that's going to affect your whole day to day, and you're going to start to slack in other areas. And so that's why sleep is like one of the foundational criteria for depression.
Right.
But it's also, are you not going to class and stuff like that? And is your like house in disorder?
Right.
And are you like not getting along with your friends and family?
Right.
Stuff. Yeah, a lot of it is interactive. I mean, that's, and I think it's because psychology and psychiatry, again, it's like, these are and we can debate whether this is true, but it's all about evaluating you within society. It's like you're not going to talk to a psychologist or psychiatrist if you're in the state of nature, right? It's like, because really all that matters there is, are you able to survive? So you could be the most depressed individual, but you could be surviving for, out surviving a non-depressed person, and that's all that really matters.
Nice.
So no, I think that's, whether they explicitly say that, it's implicitly.
Well, I think they explicitly say the opposite in a lot of the diagnoses.
Yes, but a lot of the checklists are going to have the functioning aspect in it.
Because if I'm imagining like psychiatrists I've talked to, if I say like I'm not getting along with anybody, and then like I hate my life and I'm not sleeping and I'm drinking all the time and I'm either gaining tons of weight or losing tons of weight or something like that, but it's all fine with me. I think they're going to be like, is it?
Right. Well, and then
I guess if I honestly didn't care, I don't know what they would do. But.
Well, and why are you even talking to them in the first place? Right. Because you're either talking to them because you want to, in which case you already have established probably something's wrong, or you're talking to them because you don't want to, which means that you did something wrong.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Well, so you got through the paper though, so that was good, because this was an experiment, right? To see like if we could do some of this heavier stuff.
I think it's fine. I think it's what I was trying to do is I was trying to come up with questions and things to talk about that were more sort of broadly philosophical rather than talking about whatever was called GABA energy. GABA. Oh,
GABAergic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So GABA is just one of the inhibitory neurotransmitters in the brain. I thought you did a good job. And you got the core sort of thing that he was pushing.
Yeah.
So
I was pretty lost through most of the paper, to be honest, though. I was like, I would read a sentence like 4 or 5 times. Like, I'm moving on. I don't know what this is.
Yes. A lot of jargon. Yeah. A lot of jargon. It's amazing, right? Because it's still English.
Right. Yeah, it's true. I had the experience of some of it. Like, I'm just reading words. Word.
Right. No, I mean, I would read it and I'd be like, I wonder what Anthony thinks of this sentence. Because even, again, it's like I'll have to reread stuff. And the
oscillation stuff was cool, though. I like the waves and the hertz and all that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at one of those. Yeah, cool. All right. So, and you said you didn't think we were going to get an hour. We got an hour.
We did. That's true.
Yeah.
But aren't you cutting some of it out?
Yeah, just a little bit, but not much.
Yeah. All right. So everybody who's made it this far, which better be all of you, you better come out to our show in Dripping Springs on Friday, June 12th at Dog and Bone. The show's at 7:30. Come here. Mr. K's.
Mr. K, Mr. X.
Oh, right.
What? I'm wondering. Yeah.
Mr. K. Oh, yeah. I've been cheating on you. There's another podcast.
God.
Called you by the wrong. I have another like semi-anonymous podcast.
Yeah. God.
Oh, my God. Okay. Mr. X, who won't be called Mr. X at this event.
Yeah. You just look up the roster, you'll see us. I wonder, do they have a website? Or you're on it probably at least.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they've updated their event, but I have that little poster I made. I'm going to post that again.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, actually, if you send it to me, I'll post it on mine.
Cool.
Why'd you use that photo of me, though?
I don't know. I was just looking for photos because I don't really have photos. I don't have photos of you sitting around, by the way.
No, it's just interesting because, I would say...
I was trying to look for one because a lot of them aren't, because the photo that I'm using, I think, is a different, there were like different photo qualities. So I was trying to find one that blended If you have a different photo, you can send it to me. I'll replace it.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe using my main one that like for my profile picture. I'll send that to you.
Okay, yeah.
And then if you send me the what you make up, I'll post it on mine too.
Excellent.
Sweet.
On Mr. K, I mean Mr. X's Instagram, which
Mr.
nobody
K.
knows, right? It's definitely not.
Yeah, definitely not us.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right, cool. We did it.
Yep.
All right,
Sarah.
bye.
Yeah.